Welcome back to Faith Formation at Home. This week we have a very interesting gospel story. It's Jesus cleansing the temple. A lot of biblical scholars seem to think Jesus didn't just do this one time, but he did it twice. Because in the Gospel of John, which we're reading this week, it's at the very beginning of the gospel, the beginning of Jesus' public ministry. And the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're called synoptic because it means from the same point of view. They present Jesus cleansing the temple at the end of his ministry. And so a lot of gospel scholars seem to think Jesus did this twice, right? And so what did he do? A little bit of context for us, because most of us aren't first century Jewish scholars, right? It says Jesus is in the court of the Gentiles, and he sees them selling animals and changing money. What in the world is that? So this is a picture of what the Jerusalem temple would have looked like in about Jesus' time. So you can see this big sort of open outer space, right? And then it gets concentrically smaller and smaller and smaller, and then that little building there is where the Holy of Holies is. So the Holy of Holies is the most holy part of the temple. That's where God will sometimes show up in physical form, right? And only the high priest is allowed in there, and only one time a year. Just outside of that is the court of the men. Just outside of that is the court of the women. The women were only allowed in so far back in Jesus' day. But outside of all of that, non-Jewish people, Gentiles, were supposed to gather in these big open spaces here to worship the one true God. Right? And so this gives us a clue as to why is Jesus so upset, right? Because God's plan from the very beginning wasn't just for one group of people to know who he is. He wanted everybody to know who he is. So much so that when he told King David to give instructions to Solomon to build this temple that then is rebuilt after the Babylonian exile, and then King Herod fancifies it right before Jesus' lifetime, right? God intended, he wanted there to be a court of Gentiles, a place for non-Jewish people to come and worship God and hear scriptures. And Jesus walks into this space, and what does he see? He doesn't see the nations there gathered worshiping God. He sees people selling sacrificial animals, changing money, doing all this sort of stuff, which was valid in its own right? If you're going to offer sacrifice and you're traveling a long way, you can't bring a bunch of sheep with you. It's a whole lot easier to just buy them in Jerusalem. But nevertheless, even though that's a legitimate thing, Jesus is still deeply, deeply bothered that this is what's happening in a space where everyone is supposed to get to know God. And so Jesus says, enough is enough. He makes a cord, a whip, and chases these people out of there. It's an interesting thing. Jesus, he doesn't just freak out and start chasing people. He actually thinks about it a little bit. He has enough time to make a cord, a whip, and then to chase them out. What is going on here, right? So Jesus is experiencing deep, strong emotions, just like you do and just like I do. Emotions are not wrong. They're actually neither good nor bad. It's what we do with our strong feelings that makes those actions good or bad. So when you feel really, really excited about something, that's okay. Do you use that excitement to go help other people experience joy and excitement as well? Or do you use that excitement to go do something stupid you know you're not supposed to do, like go hit your little sister or brother, right? It's what you do with that emotion that is important. So what does Jesus do with this deep, strong, frankly, righteous anger that he feels? He sees something really, really wrong, and he moves to correct it. That's an okay thing. That's a good thing, right? It's actually a virtuous thing. So this week it's a challenge to us. What do we do with those strong feelings that we feel? Our Bible story for our little ones from the Jesus Storybook Bible is called The Servant King. So with our Faith Formation Home for our little ones, we are now going to start moving ahead towards Easter. Right? We're not going to parallel the Sunday Gospels anymore. We're going to start going through Holy Week and really the Sacred Triduum, because that's a lot of material to unpack over a couple of days. And with 1 week of Faith Formation at Home that week, we don't have a whole lot of opportunity to cover those things. So we're going to start looking this week at Holy Thursday, and then we're going to look at Jesus' trial and crucifixion, and then ultimately his resurrection by Easter. So these stories are going to start feeling a lot more like Holy Week. Right? So this concept of the servant king is on Holy Thursday at the Last Supper. Jesus does something kind of crazy. He actually does two things kind of crazy. One, he takes off his outer garment and he starts washing his disciples' feet. Right? Crazy concept. These guys are thinking he's the king of the universe. He's God incarnate. He's the king of Israel. He's supposed to overthrow the Romans, and he's getting down and serving them. Right? And so these little simple gestures of service have a big weight in God's eyes. Right? And so you at home, even if you're 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, you can do simple acts of service for your family to be just like Jesus, getting down on his knees and washing feet. This year, because of the pandemic, at Holy Thursday, Mass of the Lord's Supper, the priests will not be washing feet like they normally do. to recognize this moment. So it's not a bad idea this week, sometime over the next few weeks, within your own household, maybe take an opportunity to wash each other's feet. Literally get out a bowl, get out some water, get out a towel, wash each other's feet, and just see kind of what it felt like to serve like Jesus did. Right? And then later on, the second crazy thing Jesus does at the Last Supper is he takes bread and wine and he changes it into his body and his blood. Right? So this book isn't necessarily written from a Catholic perspective. So the wording in here is going to say, Jesus says this bread is like my body. But what he actually says in the real Gospels is this bread is my body and this wine is my blood. Right? Jesus comes to us as food. And even our little ones can know you are what you eat, right? When you eat something good and healthy, you feel good and healthy. And when you eat garbage, you feel like garbage, right? If you just eat candy all the time, you feel bad. So Jesus comes to us as food so that he can get so close to us and become part of us. That's an awesome thing. Our catechism questions this week, we're at the end of the 10 Commandments, so we have the last couple of questions in here about morality and Christian living. This is actually the shortest section of catechism questions of the whole year. There's only 3, and they're pretty quick. But the first one, question 135, deals with the 5 precepts of the church. Right? Many of you may not be familiar with the concept of the precepts of the church, or if you've heard of it, you heard it a long time ago, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What are the precepts of the church? These are the basic membership guidelines for being a Catholic Christian. Right? You ever wonder what it means to be an active Catholic? Well, these 5 things are essentially what that is. Right? We worship God on Sundays and holy days of obligation and refrain from unnecessary work. We go to confession at least once a year. That's the minimum, right? I'd recommend a lot higher than that. I try to go monthly. I try to bring my family monthly. Doesn't always work out every month, but we try to do it monthly. It's easier the more you go. You shall receive Holy Communion during the Easter season. We usually call this the Easter duty, right? So we've got the obligation to go to Mass every Sunday, an obligation out of love to go to Mass every Sunday. But if you're not in a condition to receive communion, you only do that once a year during the Easter season. Make sure you go to confession first, right? But again, that's the bare minimum. Should have ourselves in a state of grace all the time so we can receive communion every week and have Jesus in our hearts, right? Shall observe the church's days of fasting and abstinence. These are simple, right? Days of fasting and abstinence are 2, Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, where we fast, right? We eat 2 small meals, 1 large meal, and no snacks in between. And abstinence, we don't eat meat. And then the days of abstinence throughout the year, every Friday in Lent, we don't eat meat. And then every Friday throughout the year isn't a day of abstinence necessarily, but it's a day of sacrifice. So you could give up eating meat, or you can choose to do something else in recognition that Friday is the day that Jesus died for our sins. Right? And then the last one, you shall help provide for the needs of the church. This is the traditional time, talent, and treasure concept of stewardship. Right? But I would encourage you to consider time, talent, treasure. There we go. Consider the treasure aspect of that. Because it's just like your own homes. It costs us money to keep lights on. It costs us money to heat the buildings and all that kind of stuff. But I would encourage you to consider giving money to the church not as keeping the doors open, keeping the lights on, keeping staff employed. Thank you for your contributions. Right? But think about it as sacrificing, making a sacrifice to God. Because I don't know about you, but I make decisions daily about money. More decisions daily focused on money than I do focused on God. And that's not a good thing. So I feel like it's God's calling on my life to sacrifice to him some of the money that he's blessed me with through my work, to remind myself that this thing, this money, is not God, but God is. So I sacrifice a little bit of that to him every week, right? And that's one of the ways I provide for the needs of the church, also through volunteering and volunteering your time and all that good stuff. Right, but those are the precepts of the church. We don't spend a lot of time on those even in-person faith formation classes, which is why I'm giving you a little more food for thought on that this week. And then the last section in here is on the Beatitudes, which is Jesus' guidelines for a happy, joy-filled life. These are kind of confusing to some people, right? How Jesus says the meek will be happy, the poor in spirit will be happy. So I'd encourage you to spend some time reading through these and try to figure out, why does Jesus think being poor in spirit will make me happy, being meek will make me happy, being merciful will make me happy? Because that's what God wants, you and me to be happy and fully alive.